Hey guys, and welcome back to another Shadow Priest Mythic Plus commentary video. So for this video, this is another key where I ran Misery. So it's a very different playstyle than when you run Searing Nightmare. So I just wanted to show you guys. This is a key where most people don't run Misery, so I wanted to show you guys how uh, it has some viability in these kind of off meta situations, right? So I'm running Misery, Auspicious Spirits, Hungering Void, and I'm playing Naya, right? So um, this is a tyrannical storming uh, bolstering key, and I think those affixes play pretty well for this build. So I wanted to show you guys, kind of how it works, kind of what it's like running it in a Halls of Atonement, where Shadow Crash and Searing Nightmare have a lot of value, right? Kind of point out the strengths and the weaknesses for it. So one of the weaknesses right off the bat is going to be a pull like this, where you pop everything basically, right? So I'll still do decent damage, right? I'm going to pop my Mind Bender, my Void Form, and then start trying to get as many spirits as I can out. So I'm casting Devouring Plagues, Void Bolts, Mind Blasts, right? I pop my Ruby right there to get a little extra crit, although it's too late. I should have popped it closer to the beginning of the pull. And yeah, you can see I end up doing, you know, 15k damage, something like that, which is significantly less than if I was playing Shadow Crash Searing Nightmare, especially if I was with Ancient Madness. I would do, maybe close to 30k or something right there. And so that's one of the weaknesses with this build, is a big pull like that where there's a lot of targets. First off, it's more involved because you have to be tab targeting or clicking on nameplates or whatever. You have to dot a lot of stuff, and you have to be casting a lot more. You have to be swapping different spells, trying to make sure you're way more invested in keeping your insanity low, making sure your Mind Blast is always on cooldown, all these things. Whereas with Searing Nightmare, you just press Mind Sear, Searing Nightmare a bunch, right? So that it's a lot easier to do that. Whereas this is more involved, like I was saying. But one of the strengths of this Misery Auspicious Spirits build is situations like these, where this pull is starting to last a while. I can get into my Void form, and I can start, getting as many ghosts as possible out. I'm Mind Searing right there because there are more than 3 targets, and when there are more than 3 targets, you get more insanity from Mind Sear than you do Mind Flay. For anybody who doesn't know, Mind Flay always gives you 3 insanity per tick, whereas Mind Sear gives you 1 insanity for everything it hits. So if you use it on one target, if you use Mind Sear on one target, you'll get 1 insanity for every tick of Mind Sear. If you use it on 3 targets, you'll get 3 insanity for every tick of Mind Sear. If you use it on 20 targets, let's say, you'll get 20 insanity for every tick of Mind Sear. So Mind Sear becomes way better the higher you go in targets, and it does similar damage to Mind Flay. So it's pretty much anytime you've got 3 or more targets, you're gonna want to be casting Mind Sear instead of Mind Flay. So that's why I was doing it there. And then yeah, this is just a prideful. I pop not Void Form, Vampiric Embrace to try and help with the healing. Although it doesn't really matter because this is just one of our weekly keys that we're doing for fun. It's not like anything that we're super worried about. Like even here, I start pulling before the tank is even in there, which is if this were like a very serious high-end key that I was super worried about, I would not do that, obviously. But because this is just with friends and we're helping out one of our friends with an alt key, it's like we're not worried at all about this, so I go ahead and start the pull a little early to try and get more value out of my stuff. And then yeah, this is one of the strengths, is you can see I'm doing 15k damage right here. Pretty comparable to how much I would be doing with Searing Nightmare if I had, I almost die right there, I get a Lay on Hands, and I pop my health pot. Pretty similar to how much damage I would be doing if I had Searing Nightmare. But the difference is, with Searing Nightmare, I could probably only do that much damage with PI, and maybe even with Void Form. Whereas with this, I didn't have PI. I did have Void Form though. But most of my damage came from my ghosts, right? Which I get way more ghosts inside of my void form than I do outside of void form, right? So it's kind of comparing apples to oranges because the Searing Nightmare playstyle is so different, and it's like way more haste. I wouldn't say way more haste reliant. Um, it's just a lot more finicky. The builds are very different in the way that they play, right? Because Searing Nightmare, you want stuff to be stacked up always, whereas with Misery, you want stuff. It honestly doesn't matter where anything is, as long as it's within your line of sight, so that you can, as long as something is within your line of sight, actually, so that you can, be casting your spells that create those ghosts. Um, so yeah, like on that pull, I did it again, like 14k. So I mean, this is a lot of damage, right? Doing pretty good. I'm at 9.1k overall so far. Um, so yeah, with Misery, like I was saying, you dot everything, and then it really doesn't matter what you're hitting, as long as you're hitting it with as many spells as possible that can generate, these shadowy apparitions that you see that just went flying from my character, right? So that would be your Mind Blasts, Firing Plagues, and your Void Bolts. But I'm pretty sure most people know that. But if you don't, those are the abilities that generate ghosts for you. Um, and because Void Form gives you 2 charges of see right there, I popped my Desperate Prayer to survive that Curse of Obliteration. Anyway, because Void Form gives you 2 charges of Mind Blast, you're going to get twice as many ghosts. It's actually more than twice as many ghosts, because you also get Void Bolt, and Void Bolt gives you ghosts as well, right? So it's like having 3 charges of the Mind Blast. Although Void Bolt is better than Mind Blast because it gives you, increased damage to the target you're hitting. It's an instant cast, right? So there are a lot of benefits to being in Void form when you're playing Misery like this. So yeah, right here I'm just gonna pop PI. I've got dots on everything, so it doesn't matter that they're kind of jumping around a little bit. It matters a little bit for when I pop my Mindbender like this, because your Mindbender hits stuff that's close to it. So you're kind of wanting stuff to stay pretty grouped up, but pretty much every class wants stuff to stay grouped up when they're doing AoE. So the tank is going to be trying to keep it grouped up anyway. So okay, so we're almost to the first boss. We have one more shard to kill, and I'm at 9.4k overall. So I mean, it's feeling pretty good. This is more than I would be at if I were running Searing Nightmare and Shadow Crash. I don't want to say that nobody would be doing this much damage with that build. It's just I don't think I've ever done this much damage with that build at this point in the dungeon. Granted, there are some other things to take into consideration there, like the group comp. We have one guy who's doing less damage than everybody else because he's on an alt, right? Which means that there's more time for me to do damage. So maybe that has an effect, right? Our tank almost dies right there, which is super sketch. But yeah, I mean it's pretty solid, especially in a dungeon where most people don't use it. So as the key goes on, I'll try to mention big important moments where I think Misery is better than Searing Nightmare and Shadow Crash. Like this moment right here coming up. So we got the Shard of Halkias. It's 4 targets because we pulled the 2 in front of it into it, and then it's not enough for Searing Nightmare to get a lot of value, right? Because Searing Nightmare is better the more targets there are. Searing Nightmare would be fine here for sure, but Misery is really nice here, especially if I had gotten that Void form a little earlier, because I can just pump those ghosts, right? And Misery, I mean, Misery scales with targets as well, right? Like Searing Nightmare does. It's just that Misery is also pretty good at low target counts, right? So like even 1 target, Misery is significantly better than Searing Nightmare and Shadow Crash. And then as you scale up, Misery scales pretty decently as well. It's just that at these low target numbers, Misery is not losing very much. In fact, it's just getting better the more targets you add, right? Up until you can't keep your dots on things. or you spend all of your globals trying to dot stuff and never casting any abilities that generate these ghosts. At that point, misery starts to get bad, right? So like, let's say 10 targets plus, maybe misery starts to get worse. Because it just takes too many globals. But with like lower target counts, anywhere from 1 to even like 8 targets, misery seems to be doing pretty well, right? Um, and in 9.1, I think it's only going to get stronger because uh, this build lends itself to um, scaling with stats, right? So your dots will tick faster, your global cooldown will be shorter, which means you get more spells over the course of the same amount of time, right? Stats are just going to make this build stronger. You'll have more crit, which means your ghost generating abilities are more likely to critically strike, which means they'll generate 2 ghosts instead of 1, which is not a small thing. It's like a pretty big thing, actually. That's another reason why soul letting Ruby is so good, um, especially when you're running this misery build, is because it gives you huge amounts of crit, especially for this patch. I'm at like 44% crit if I get full value out of my soul letting Ruby, and I've only got 10% base, so it's like a lot of crit, right? And all of that crit means that not only am I going to be spawning more ghosts, but they're also going to be critically striking more often, right? So I think misery, as we get more stats, is going to be really good. That's not to say that Shadow Crash and Searing Nightmare aren't good with more stats, because they are. Same reasons. You get more Searing Nightmares off if you have a shorter global cooldown. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think Misery specifically is going to be pretty good going into 9.1. Um, and I want to go through and try every dungeon with Misery, um, especially before 9.1, to try and get an idea of if it's really good and what situations it's really good in. For example, I did a lot of the raid testing, the PTR testing for Sanctum of Domination, and it seemed there were several fights where, um, okay, maybe just a couple fights where there were some ads, right? And the ads were spawning pretty frequently, and they were, pretty far apart usually. I'm thinking like the one with, I don't want to spoil anything. The one with the guy with the chains. If anybody knows who I'm talking about, I don't want to spoil the bosses. Um, that guy had, I think it's Painsmith. That guy had a lot of ads that would spawn pretty regularly, and then also Kel'Thuzad has a lot of ads that spawn regularly, and Kel'Thuzad specifically has a lot of ads that are really spread out. So I'm trying to find situations like that where Misery is really good. I'm already pretty certain that Misery is our best option for really big spread out cleave like that. But I'd like to see how bad it is comparatively in moments like this, for example, where you've got a lot of targets that need to die quickly that are all really close to each other. Um, in a moment like that, obviously Searing Nightmare is the better choice. It's just how much better is it, and how much do you really lose when you play Misery instead? Um, yeah, so I mean, there's not much else to say. I'm just gonna go through my typical rotation. That's one of the nice things about playing Misery. It's way closer to it's basically the exact same rotation that you would use on, let's say, Shriekwing, a single target boss in Raid, right? Single target bosses in Raid, you have like this opener in your mind that you do every single time, right? And when you're playing different talents, like Searing Nightmare and Shadow Crash, that opener changes, right? You're like, when do I start putting in Shadow Crashes? What do I use to fill in certain moments, right? But with Misery, it's the exact same rotation. So your opener can be literally the exact same as when you're playing Twist of Fate in a raid, and you'll do good damage. That's the optimal opener with Misery. So it makes things a lot simpler, single target wise, and it does pretty good damage single target, better than, like I've said before. better than Searing Nightmare and Shadow Crash. So I try to fade every time those guys spawn, just so that I have as little threat as possible on them, because I like to stand at ranged when I can. Oh, this is one of the sweet moments. I Goblin Jump out of this. I just recently swapped to Goblin, um, and so I've been looking for moments where Goblin Jump is really strong, and that's a good moment. Goblin Jump is fast enough if you get dispelled, where he jumps up, you can Goblin Jump, and he won't hit you, right? Up until now, I've been using my Soul Shape to get out of that, but let's say it goes on you twice in a row, right? You can only Soul Shape one of them. What are you going to do for the second one? It turns out Goblin Jump is a good option for that as well. I think even if you play it correctly, I think you might even be able to disperse, just use the added movement speed to get out of it. But I'm not positive on that, so I would take that advice with a grain of salt. Don't let it ruin one of your keys because you tried to disperse out of something that you actually can't. Um, Another little hidden thing that I've been wanting to try with a coordinated group is when that leap is about to go off on somebody, I want somebody to try decursing me instead of decursing the person who is going to get jumped on, and then I just life grip them out of it, right? I think that's an option, although, like, maybe you have a, trying to think, maybe a paladin or something, some class that doesn't have very good movement. Somebody like that, or maybe somebody has used all their movement and they're like, oh, I'm definitely going to get hit by this. For a last ditch effort, instead of decursing them, they have nothing to get out of it, right? You could decurse a priest, and the priest can life grip them out of it, and you can avoid it altogether, right? That's something that I would like to try that I haven't had the chance to, and I haven't really mentioned it to anybody, but I think the scenarios where that's the best play are really, really small, right? Because pretty much everybody has a way to get out of that. Um, but I think there are cases where, let's say somebody's super unlucky and they get that jump on them 4 times in a row on a really high tyrannical key where it's going to kill them for sure. Then maybe on the 4th time, they've used their 3 abilities on the other 3. Maybe the 4th time you dispelled me instead of dispelling them, and I life grip them out of it. It's definitely something I've thought about and would be interesting to see in a key, but like I said before, I don't think there are enough cases where it's the best move. It's just way easier to just dispel the person who has it on them. But yeah, so. Okay, back into this, we're back on, what's this person's name? High Inquisitor Elise? Oh, High Adjudicator? I don't think I've ever said this person's name, but we're working on this 3rd boss. Not much to say here. If you were playing Karain in this dungeon, with Searing Nightmare and Shadow Crash, let's say on a high fortified key or any fortified key where you're trying to do a lot of trash damage, you can tag these ghostly parishioners that come out and follow people. If you just hit them with a Shadow Word Pain, you'll get first strike. If you're playing Karain and you have first strike, it'll proc first strike and give you a lot of crit. So that's something you should be doing if you're playing that. But because I'm not going to be touching those parishioners. Another little thing you can do is when those parishioners spawn, as they're about to enter these, like this thing that I'm standing by where it sucks the guy in and he disappears, you can hit them with a Shadow Word Death, and then they enter that thing, and you'll get the insanity from it, from them dying, right? And then this is another moment where Misery is kind of weird, because typically what I would do is just focus one of these packs, just start hitting it with a bunch of Searing Nightmares. But it's kind of strange with Misery because what you want to do is dot everything, and you can see all these ghosts flying everywhere from me. You want to dot as many of these souls as you can, and then yeah, you're just back to whatever ghost generating abilities you have. So I popped Void Form here. Power Infusion would help with this a lot because you can just cast faster, so you can get more dots on things. But yeah, and then right here, cleaning up all these ads, Searing Nightmare would be great right here because you just blast all these ads like crazy. I typically do a lot more damage in this room than I'm doing right now. Searing Nightmare is definitely uh, better for this room in particular. Because like I would usually be probably doing more than the mage is even doing right now. I'd be like 15k, 16k, but instead I'm doing 6.7. The rogue is about to catch up, right? Um, but yeah, up until now, there have been a decent amount of situations in this key where Misery is actually pretty good. And because of the consistency of the damage, right, like I was talking about before, it means that all you need is a lot of situations where where Misery is pretty good. Because if you have a lot of those, then the damage that you're doing consistently is going to be pretty high, right? Because it's pretty good. Hopefully that makes sense. Maybe a better way to explain it would be uh, Misery is really good in certain situations, right? And the overall damage that I do is directly related to how good Misery is in every situation in the dungeon, right? So if you have a lot of situations in the dungeon where Misery is good, then I'm going to be doing pretty good damage, right? The same is true for anything in this game, right? Any build, any class, any spec, anything, right? If the thing that you're trying to build or whatever you're playing is good for a lot of stuff, then you're going to do good damage, right? So this is I kind of pop off on this boss. It's just the single target rotation. You know, I'm using Devouring Plagues to not overcap on Insanity. I pop my potion. I'm doing 20k single target damage right here. This is with Lust and Prideful. But I'm more than double everybody else's damage up until 30 seconds in the fight, which is when people start to catch up. But even then, I mean, I'm doing so much damage that they're not gonna come close by the end. Like the boss is already at 20% HP, and I've done 18k damage through this whole fight, right? So you could not do that if you had Searing Nightmare and Shadow Crash, which is why I think that this build is pretty good on Tyrannical, like I've said 20 times in this video already. So yeah, that was Halls of Atonement with Misery and Auspicious Spirits. Hopefully you guys enjoyed and learned something. Go ahead and try this build in, you know, whatever keys you want. See how good it is. I recommend Halls of Atonement. Not bad. Anyway, thanks for watching. Catch you guys in the next one. Peace.